G'day and welcome to Dog Talk. I'm Dan Camilleri.
And I'm Laura McKillop. We'd like to start by thanking Enduro for their ongoing support in bringing you our fortnightly Q&A. Tonight we're fortunate enough to be speaking with Bill Mytton from Burradoo Ranch in America.
G'day Bill, how you going, mate?
Good on ya.
For anyone that doesn't really know Bill, well, I love to really thank him because he's over there in Montana, 16 hours behind us. So organising this pre-recording has been a little bit difficult, but he bared with us there. And to his own esteem, tells us he's not very good with technology, but has managed to battle his way through. So thanks for persevering with us, Bill.
No problem. It's great seeing you guys again.
Yes, it's been a little while.
Yep, saw you at Mansfield.
Good trip in Australia, I reckon, for you.
We're ready to come back for sure.
So, mate, how long have you been where you are now?
We bought this ranch in 1993, and we've expanded it over the years, a little bit larger than the original ranch.
And prior to that?
Pardon? Prior to that, we had another property up in very northern Montana, right on the Canadian border. Sold that, got too populated up there, bought a place here. And then my wife was a veterinarian back in Wisconsin. So we had a farm there for a little bit and bounced back and forth. But now everything's here permanently.
And for those that, might not gather, you don't have a full American accent.
That's because I have dual citizenship. I was born in Victoria. Sometimes you don't want to say that, but we now have a property up by Vala that we visit every year. But had family that had property out by Euroa and down by Crib Point in Victoria years ago.
So you obviously grew up in Australia here?
Dad was Australian. My mom was an American. Dad worked for Mytton's Limited that made stainless steel products. You might even have a sink in your house that the family made. And then Dad came over to America in the early 50s to learn how to make stainless steel beer barrels. So that's where he met my mom, who was a Yank, and she came to Australia. And we were all born there, but we moved to America in '63 when she wanted to be back to close to her folks.
And did Dad learn how to fill those barrels as well?
He was very good at filling them. And you guys were very good at emptying them.
Oh, beautiful, mate. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, mate?
Well, after getting out of high school, I went to college and actually have a degree in both range management and wildlife management from the United States. Worked up in northern Alberta, up in the oil sands country for a master's degree, and then worked through, my first real job after school was as a range manager on a military base in Colorado. And then, so I've lived in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Alberta, all through the western states. And I was a big game biologist for a while back in Wisconsin when Janice and I first got married.
Beautiful. And what is it that keeps you going these days, mate? What fills your days now?
Well, everybody says we're supposed to be retired, but as you know, on station properties and ranches, you never retire. I just got off a tractor today after we finally finished haying, probably the longest season we've ever had. We started right before July 4th when the Motley crew were all here, David and Jackie, and we just finished today hauling the last round bales off the field, and thank goodness we're done with it. And I had a good stiff drink afterwards.
Well deserved by the sounds of it.
Empty one of those beer barrels, mate?
Not quite beer. I went something a little harder.
So obviously we had a question there about your naming your stud. There's a little bit of history there.
Yeah, Burradoo Ranch was Burradoo was the name of a yacht my dad sailed in the '56 Olympics in Melbourne, where he and Jock Sturrock, who represented Australia, I think 2 or 3 times in the America's Cup races, Jock and my dad were great friends. He got a bronze medal in '56. Actually, the yacht was spelled Buraddoo, but I knew no American would ever get this pronunciation right. So we changed it to just Burradoo, which actually I've seen, I think, one station in Queensland and one in New South Wales with the same name.
Yep.
But obviously we have that name here and it means go with the wind in Aboriginal.
Very nice. A little touch of home for you.
Try to. Got the Southern Cross on our sign.
That's very cool. Yeah.
That's
You mentioned earlier you come back to Australia once a year, and you still own a property here.
We have a property by Vala in New South Wales, close to the beach. And Scott Amon runs cattle and sheep on it when we're not there, kind of takes care of our house and everything. Typically, we only spend a week or two on the property and then try and see as much of Australia as we can. Obviously, we know a lot of Kelpie people and managed, I think last year we were at Mansfield. We went over to Lucindale, then up to Nyngan, then up to the Lorimers up out of Rockhampton at Mora. And that's so spend very little time in one spot. Love camping. We've done several outback trips. We visited Atisha Gray out at Glenflorrie one year, and got to stay on most of the Kidman properties on one trip we did, which was a lot of fun.
Did you make your way out to Durham Downs?
Yeah, we did. With John was the manager there, and yeah, we actually went with a guy by the name of Barry Doonan, and Barry's son teaches welding on all the Kidman properties for the young jackaroos and gillaroos.
Yeah. And Cobby or John, as you mentioned there, he can really turn on the hospitality for you too, can't he?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If I was a lot younger, I'd be working there for sure.
I don't think he's on that property anymore. I think he's moved closer east now that his boys are at school. But I used to go out there hunting every year, and that great family, fantastic family.
Oh, it was a lot of fun, and we went up to Glengyle and Napa Mary and a lot of those others too. So I'm sure he's getting a little older and like a little bit of a tamer life too.
Absolutely, a safer one. And to anyone out there that might not know where Valor is, so we're talking on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, around that Coffs Harbour area as well.
Yeah, it's just about 25 minutes south of Coffs Harbour.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. So obviously we dog talk, so we talk about dogs.
Yep.
And where do dogs come into your equation?
Well, we've had a very varied dog life. Early on, I had mostly hunting dogs, golden retrievers, English setters, English pointers. I worked for some very big properties in Georgia and Maryland. We probably had 50 hunting dogs at the time, and got into the bird dog field trial world where most of it was horseback bird dogs, which I think is a little bit different than what you conduct in Australia. And then when I finished school and moved mostly to the western states, we had border collies for quite a few years. They came from Ireland. A friend of mine, Sean Derrig, who's done phenomenal in the bird dog world, did very well with border collies in both single and brace trials. And when he decided to go to the bird dog world, he literally gave us 3 dogs that he'd bought from Ireland. And that was the beginning of our stud on our ranch. After a few years, one of my relatives was a veterinary out of Mount Gambier, and he worked on a big station, Calabria Station, with Ian Gilchrist and Tom Gilchrist. And we visited them one day and watched the Kelpies at work about 20 some years ago or more, and pretty much fell in love with Kelp. We had Kelpies when I was a kid, but they were just dogs. It was like anything. They were chained up. We used them and didn't think much about it. But once we saw the dogs at Calabro, we quickly ended up shipping a couple of them. I think we got one from Arthur Hazlitt at that time. Rihanna dog, and it was pretty cheap to ship them to the States in those days. It was $75 to get it to Billings, Montana, and it's a little bit more expensive right now.
So,
And
what are bird dog trials, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, hunting's a huge thing in America, as you probably can guess.
Yeah.
So in a bird dog trial, basically the ones we were in were all horseback, where you have two dogs running at one time for an hour, and the handlers are riding horseback. Two judges are behind them riding horseback. And then you might have a gallery of visitors or watchers of 50 to 100 riding horseback behind you. So the dogs go on point, the handlers get off. The dog has to stay steady through the whole flushing of the birds and everything. And they shoot, but they don't typically kill anything. It's just a shot to make sure the dog doesn't move. And then once that's over with, they go on for the next brace. So it's how many fines, how they run, the style when they're on point, and things like that. So it's a lot like Kelpie trials or any of your three sheep trials. There's points given for everything they do and subtractions for everything they do wrong. And if they do something wrong, really wrong, they'll just be pulled. And then only one dog will be running until the end of the hour.
Wow.
And when you mention a dog on point, so when they actually flush the bird, they're literally standing still, pointing in the direction of the bird they flushed from?
Yes, they're supposed to stay until the handler releases them. And if they move a muscle as the bird takes off, that'll be held against them. They'll lose points or they'll be pulled off completely. So they have to stay steady to wing and shot. So after the shot, then the handler will usually take the dog with a leash, just pull him off a little bit and resend him out to see if he can find some more birds.
So you don't actually have to be a good shot to do.
You don't have to be any shot because they're blanks. We've done that, and I think I was talking a little bit with Daniel. The other thing we do on the ranch here every year, we host a group of combat wounded veterans, some of which use their dogs in combat as either bomb dogs or attack dogs. So that's been another avenue of dog world that we've been exposed to and really been impressed with those dogs in general and how many lives they save and just what kind of animals. So we've been in the stock dog world, the hunting world, and the military world too.
And so just touching those bird dogs again, mate, what type of birds are we flushing? Pheasants, quail, everything, anything in particular?
Yeah, where we are in Montana, we have ringneck pheasants, we have sharp-tailed grouse, sage grouse, Hungarian partridge. When you get to the mountains where the trials typically aren't held, we have blue grouse up there. They may even do chuck or partridge. It depends upon where you are in the state and the kind of habitat. So you might find 2 or 3 different species in any given trial.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. And before we get into the stock dogs stuff there, yeah, you and I have spoken extensively, like you just mentioned, about the wounded soldiers that have come out there, mate. What any of them bringing their dogs out with them, and what type of dogs were a lot of those guys, men or women, using?
You know, it's interesting because all the dogs that have been here, the first one that came was a German Shepherd from the Netherlands. And then we had another German Shepherd from Czechoslovakia, I believe it was. We get a few Malinois. So we've had a little mixture. It depends. And, you know, typically when they come here, because we're dealing with combat wounded veterans, the dogs typically have been hurt along with their handler. And if the handler's lucky enough, they get to adopt that dog when it's retired. If the dog is not hurt when the handler's hurt, the dog typically goes back into combat.
Into service, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming these relationships that you were witnessing between dog and handler, or well, I suppose owner now, not handlers so much. Well, there'll always be handlers, but you're witnessing some pretty special relationships there.
They're phenomenal. They're very emotional relationships because obviously the dogs have saved the handlers' lives numerous times, probably more times than you can count. What's most interesting, they seem to blend in well in a family situation. So even with young kids, the only thing I've noticed is you don't want to throw a tennis ball or something like that because that's their reward.
End up with hands like these, bark all off them.
Yeah, it's one of those things can change very quickly if you're not aware. But we've had some dogs here that literally have made the Hall of Fame in the military world. You've probably seen some movies in Australia that depicted some of the dogs that we've seen here.
Yeah, radio.
Yeah, absolutely. And after these dogs come, you mentioned that like throwing a ball there. So all these dogs have been through some pretty hard yards on their body. That desire and that work ethic is still there after, like, while they're winding down. Like, they haven't started to ease down a bit.
I think it's still there. They've got to be careful. We had one situation with a dog that was actually retired from military work, was at Walter Reed Hospital with its handler and alerted in the hospital. And the handler said, there's got to be a bomb here or some explosives. And he told the security people that, and they said, no, there's no way. Well, he took the dog back down the hallway, and sure enough, the dog alerted. Well, what it was a box of fireworks for July 4th celebration. So the dog was still on regardless. And, it is something, because some of them, when they're in the airports, will profile certain people, obviously, that they've seen in combat scenarios. So I don't think they ever get away from their work world, even when they're retired.
That work ethic in them, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
You're right, Laura?
I was just going to say, so how did you then come in and get your Kelpies?
Well, once we, like I said, we had the Border Collies first, and they did really well for us. But once we saw the Kelpies working over by Casterson and, up north, Barabba, Ningen, places like that, they fit us because they're short-haired. They can endure heat. And, even though we get extreme cold, the Kelpie does well in America, even in cold. But we're dealing with altitude. So if we might be working a stock day, we might start at 4,000 feet, and you'll have to do the conversions to meters.
Divided by 3.
Yeah, we might gain 3,000 or 4,000 feet in altitude during the day. It's hot weather. You're gaining altitude. Oxygen levels are different. But the Kelpies have really adapted well for us. And a lot of times you might be riding 5-10 miles to start work, and then you start work, and it's pretty much horseback country. So, that's a dog that's held up well for us. And there's a lot of good Border Collies, but, one of the things we're seeing a lot with Border Collies are these small 3-sheep trials and not getting the endurance kind of work that we need the Kelpie for, or the Border Collie, that fits our mode. We're not into trialing. I'm not, at least. Just don't have time. But it is one of those things. They just fit us well. And I've got 3 dogs. I know this is terrible to say to Australians, but I've got 3 Kelpies sitting in the house here with me now. And they adapt very well as a family dog with young kids and things like that. So to me, we've had lots of different breeds of dogs over the years. My wife's a vet, so we've had a little bit of everything from lion hounds to retrievers to pointing dogs, you name it, we've probably had it. And like I say, the Kelpie just can switch on for work and then switch off to relax.
Yep.
Did you find your bird dogs switched off as easy as your stock dogs?
No.
Yeah, that, yeah,
Probably
especially
the
Spaniels,
English
right?
setters. The English setters would switch off a little easier than the English pointers. We did have some that made very good dogs just to be around, but the way we handle them, they're either in the kennel or out working. So just letting them run around with the kids or something wasn't really something we did with those dogs. Whereas with the Kelpies, we do, or even with the Border Collies or the Labradors, they can be out in the yard doing something with the kids or something. So it was a little bit different the way we handled them and expectations, but there's no reason to think they couldn't fit the same modes. It's just that the way we work them, they didn't.
And how do you go about sourcing the Kelpies that you, I guess, imported to America?
What was that question, Laura?
How do you go about sourcing where you wanted to get your Kelpies from and which ones to buy and take across?
Well, one of the first ones, it was one of the previous magazines. We literally read an article about Rihanna and Arthur Hazlitt up in Baraba country. And we were out on the coast. We just took a 10-hour trip to get to him and sat down and impressed with what we saw at the time. And then, like I say, down Tom Gilchrist down in the Casterton area. And over the years, we met Kevin Howell up at a clinic up in Canada. So we got tight with Kevin, and we used to fly before we had the property we have now. We used to fly in on a Monday, drive out to Kevin and Kay's, and so we could go to the Forbes sale on Tuesday and watch 90 some odd dogs working in the yards, of which I think there was only one Border Collie, but the rest were Kelpies. So it was pretty easy. And we've had, dogs from Kevin and Kay, David Motley, Scott Amon, the Gilchrists, with a variety of dogs, and then tried to figure out which ones fit best for us.
Yeah. And what stock are you working?
We've changed over the years. We used to, in the summertime, we took on some lease stuff where we ran about 1,500 sheep on our property, which was great for working. It sounds like just a lawn mowing crew in your country, but for this country, that was a lot of sheep. The problem we have here is we have every predator known man to man and women. We've got grizzly bears, black bears, coyotes, wolves, fox, mountain lions, and we actually have them here. So, the sheep thing, we had to yard them up every night, and then our fences weren't great sheep fences like you guys have. So pretty soon they start crawling through, and then the next thing you know, you've got 500 sheep on the neighbor's hayfield. So now we have just a training flock of Katahdin sheep, which are hair sheep, and for the dog work. And right now we're running Hereford cattle on the property, but Angus and Hereford are the big breeds right here.
Yep.
Yeah, well, so you've spoken about the Aussie lines that you've brought over. Have you mixed that with anything back over in the States?
Not really. There's a couple lines. There's Larry Painter out in Missouri that has a line of dogs, but a lot of what we're breeding to outside, and we haven't gone outside of what we've brought over very much. But the dogs we do go to come again from Australian people that we know. So it's not like we're really going outside to a line of dogs that we're not familiar with. And I'm sure we could in America, but one thing I've said many times over here is that Australia has a dog culture. You're used to using them constantly on stock. I think it's a relatively new culture in America. And, one of the worst things is the first thing they advertise is how much the dog bites. Well, you know what happens to the biting dog in Australia. So it's a different concept, and it's one when we sell pups here, we have to talk to them about the differences between a border collie and a kelpie, and years ago, a lot of what we had here were Queensland heelers or cattle dogs, and because they weren't trained probably, and they obviously work differently than a dog that's a heading dog, um, caused a lot of angst with landowners and stock owners that said, just don't bring your dogs. But it's changing over time for the same reasons I think you guys have in Australia, is that getting help on a property is extremely hard and extremely expensive right now. So a dog fits the bill way better. It used to be we'd have 10 cowboys on horses bring cattle in. Now my wife can go out with 2 dogs, bring them in by herself.
That was actually going to be my next question, was based on that resource and the availability and the cost. How are people adopting that? I've been able to take on a dog now to replace those 10 cowboys or a couple of dogs.
Well, I think because of the same thing, people just can't get the help. It's one thing when you're closer to a city where there's a lot of backyard horses and people will show up with one telephone call. But if you're out in the middle of Montana, it's hard to get people. So where we're selling dogs, and that we're selling them to bigger properties typically that have to first learn how to use the dog. And then once they do, and a lot of it is horseback, which is a little bit different than what you're dealing with. They're taking them on, and we've got a fair few buyers that have got 5 or 6 of our dogs over time. So I think it's a culture that's progressing, and now what has to happen is the fine art of watching the utility trial at Mansfield and seeing what those dogs can really do is something that a lot of Americans are trying to embrace. And we're getting some of the clinicians over here, Gary White, David's been over. That's really helped people understand the different culture of the dogs you have in Australia versus how they were typically used here. And it's almost like, stock handling is much different today than it was maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But you seem to have, obviously you've mentioned some names there and some different dogs. How do you go about keeping yourself educated with what's going on over here? Because you seem to have your finger on the pulse a bit. What's your means? Like, are you watching stuff on YouTube or on Facebook, or just speaking to people and getting videos? How do you keep yourself, I suppose, fresh with what's going on besides your yearly trip?
As Laura can probably attest, I'm not afraid to say hello to people. And I think that's the biggest thing. When we go to Australia, we don't have a schedule. So if we see some kelpies somewhere, we're going to stop and talk to people. And a lot of the people we've met just driving down a road and there's a sign, or we see somebody out in a field, we typically stop and talk to them. And then fortunately we've been to, I don't know how many national trials, 5 or 6 now. So we've met a lot of that group, and they've introduced us to other people and things like that. But we're not afraid to sleep on the ground next to somebody and visit with them about dogs, whether they're on a stock route up in Queensland or something. If they offer a beer and a place to sit down for the night, we'll do it. So it's been a varied world. New Zealand was the same thing. I think we spent 6 weeks there and spent 2 nights in a motel, and we didn't know anybody. But by the time we got done unloading 80-pound boxes of frozen meat on one property, we ended up staying with them for 5 days. So it's a matter of meeting people, and especially in agriculture, as you guys know, you have like interests. So if you can talk the rural lifetime, then it's pretty easy to meet people and find out about their dogs. And like I say, you can tell we've got a mix and match of different dogs. Some work out better than others, and that's the game we all play, I think.
Well and
Absolutely.
truly. We all try and
Yeah.
play the game.
Mate, next time you're over, if you're in this part of the woods, mate, drop in, say good day. There's always a cold beer in my fridge.
That sounds good.
Have you got a particular style of a stock dog that you like or that appeals to yourself?
I'm not sure. What I need is a dog, like I say, because so much of our work is horseback. Um, I need a dog that can really work everything from yearlings to, if we've got young cow calf pairs, a dog that can push those pairs without creating a wreck. Um, so often what I see in America is everybody wants something to bite something. I want a dog that, if it's a Angus cow with a calf, they're terrible to deal with to start with. I want them to give them a little relief, but then give the cow time to turn around and do the right thing. And if she never does, then a good nose bite or something like that to send her on. But I can't have, and a lot of our stuff is high mountain stuff. So you got to be able to send a dog up the mountain to bring something down to you down the valley. So a dog that's pretty independent. And some of the dogs we had from the Gilchrist down in Casterton country, they were great hunting dogs. So you may not even see the stock up in the bush, but they'd go up there. And one of the interesting stories, we knew there were 3 Angus bulls up on a mountain one time. So I sent a couple dogs up to bring them down. And here comes four black things coming down the mountain. Well, as they got closer and closer, I realized the last one was a great big black bear coming with the bulls. So it definitely got our attention. And luckily I called the dogs off of the 4th one. But so that's the kind of stuff we need. Again, I think some of the precision and the work I've seen in Australia on sheep is phenomenal. And, we're still trying to learn a lot of that. And everybody has their way about doing it. But luckily we've been fortunate to go to some clinic stuff over there and just be around real stock people versus, there's a difference between dog trainers in my mind and stock people that use dogs for their work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're right, Laura?
It's all right.
I was going to say, we talked about, touched on breeding there earlier. Do you breed many of your own pups?
We typically try and breed about 2 litters, maybe 3 a year. And so we can place them pretty much agriculturally. There is a big demand for agility, but we try and stay not away from it because the reality is Kelpies do great at that. They're doing great at scent, at tracking. The other thing we do is if people, like I say, several ranches have numerous dogs from us. If they want to breed those dogs that are all our breeding, and I know exactly where they're coming from, then we'll help them place the puppies. Because, they're in a rural setting and just their contact list is a lot less than us. So we've got a group of people, so we don't have to actually raise the pups. What we do typically, if we have that scenario, they'll keep them till 6 weeks old, bring them to us, and then we have people come to us to view the puppies because we're a little bit more centrally located.
Yeah. And what are you looking for when you're selecting dogs to join?
Well, their work ethic and I like a long-legged dog. I'll be the first to say that. Athletic, with a mind that, I like a dog that'll, even we've got a pup right now that just comes up to you, wants to play, but then he'll sit and look at you. And he's thinking. I want a thinking dog versus just a reactionary dog. We've had issues with some that have so much work in them, they're not really working for you, they're working for themselves. And that's part of my learning too. I don't claim to be the expert on the block, but that's what we're looking for when we're doing our breeding. Primarily, what have the adults done for us, and what traits do they have that I really like? And we've gone back to some of our earlier breeding. I have a really nice dog, Motley Snow, right now, a big cream colored dog. We just bred it last week. He's 10 years old, a little over 10 actually. But he's produced 3 just chocker block full litters of real go-getter dogs. So, and we've bred him to one bitch 3 times and 2 others. So I think this is his 5th breeding, and been very pleased with them, even though there were different bitches involved.
Yeah. And have you tried any Australian sires semen, I've just lost all my words.
AI. Yeah. Have you imported any semen?
Yeah. Have you had any AI from semen from Australia?
No, we haven't. We've tried AI here a couple times without great success. We've done fresh semen AI, just simply the dog sitting there. Get some of these aged dogs that just don't breed up well. Now, I'll tell you one thing about that Motley Snow. I don't know if it's like David, but that thing is the best breeding dog I've ever seen. Don't tell him that. But
I'll have to ask Jackie that.
But we've done mostly fresh. We have shipped some semen, but I have not brought anything from Australia. I would rather, if I can afford it, bring a dog that works over there. I can look at it on both sheep and cattle and bring it here. It's going to cost more, but 1 or 2 litters and you've covered those costs typically. Yeah. So we haven't got into that game. It's a little hard for us to find a veterinary, even though my wife's one, find one that can take the semen and store it and keep it. And then you hear the stories of some of the stuff some people have been very successful, others not successful. So yeah, I don't know much about, obviously the horse world and the cattle world is way different. But the dog world, we haven't really ventured much into that.
Are you considering collecting from Snow before he does pass?
David was just here and brought that same thing up. We may do that because he has produced so well and he's got good viable sperm right now. So that is on the docket. And we've got one other dog that goes back to some early stuff that we may do the same thing with.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have said, look ahead and not behind when you're breeding. And I think that's a good thing to think about is, a lot of people want to go backwards, but they forget sometimes that it wasn't all that great on the beginning end of something. And now you're looking and some of the great, one of the ones I always use is Secretariat was probably one of the best racehorses ever. But he never produced himself again. He's kind of a lackluster sire where you get some others out there that aren't as notorious or anything, and they produce really well and fast horses or good dogs or whatever.
I suppose that leads into what I was going to ask next, and having exposure to not only stock dogs, but so many different types of dogs with multi-purpose dogs. Do you believe that there's the sire of them has particular influence over the litter more so than the other?
We've had a couple of bitches that have really produced well. And I would say, and they've produced well with different sires. So, it's a case by case, I think. In the one case I was talking about with Snow, he seems to be able to breed a variety of females and produce good pups. But the females we're picking are ones that we've bred anyway, so I may be biased on that one. I'm not sure who has the greater influence, but we have a really good dog we got out of Canada that goes back to some of Tony Parsons' stuff. And that bitch in particular has been great. We got a full sister to her from another litter that was a real clunker. So we just gave it away. So again, the whole genetics game is such a gamble, as I'm sure both of you realize. If you get the magic answer, let me know what it is and I'll do it.
How do you go about picking a pup for yourself, Bill?
Well, I'm like a lot of breeders. I probably picked the last one that's in the litter sitting there when they're all taken. But no, we kept a dog we call Buster. I picked him probably when he was 3 weeks old. He just had a personality that fit me. He wanted to be with me all the time. He listened from puppy on, and he's still the same thing today. So that's some of the stuff I look like, just that independent kind of go and work, but be willing to be right back with you kind of thing. So that's what, it's like everything that when you've got 6 little bundles of fur, it's kind of hard. I think some people do it smarter than we do in that they may keep pups until they're 10 months old before they distribute the rest of the litter. You get a much better feel. We typically send them down the road when they're about 12 weeks old. And our biggest problem here at this point is not having enough work for them.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the cattle, we've got some training sheep, but we don't have the volume we used to have. So I think that's a big one. I look to some of the folks I know over in Australia, and clearly they've got volume, and they can probably weed through puppies much easier than I can at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the other thing we do just, we are very good, if I must say so, both Janice and myself, at staying in touch with our buyers and asking them, understanding what kind of operation they have, and then how the dog has worked. And we follow that up pretty much all the time if they're from decent sized ranches or farm situations where we know the guy, whoever's bought them, will be honest with us and tell us what's good and what's bad. And that's worked out really well for us.
Do you find you have a lot of repeat buyers once they get their hands on a Kelpie? They want more, or is that not the case in America?
We have quite a few people that may have 4, 5, 6 of our dogs. They're bigger operations. On the smaller ones, they might have 1 or 2. So I would say our repeat buyer thing is very big for us, or word of mouth. On this litter we just bred the other day, there's nothing on the ground, obviously. We've already sold half the litter, just on the reputation of both the bitch and the dog in this case. And it's a repeat breeding. So all of the commitments we have so far already have breeding from that same cross.
Yeah. And you, when you're speaking to potential clients, is there any advice you offer them when they are looking for a pup or a dog?
Well, this might get me in trouble. My advice is be careful about sending them to trainers that don't understand Kelpies. A Kelpie is not a border collie, in my opinion. What I've seen is trying to put too much pressure on a young dog before it needs pressure. And again, I think that's one of the things in America you see is it's almost like they want to do something daily instead of doing something for a short period, lay off for a couple weeks, bring them back, do something else, until they're mature enough. The other part we see is when you get a pup that matures physically very early, there's an assumption that his or her brain has caught up with the physical side. And you have to convince people that that's not the case. He's still a puppy at 10 months old. So you can't expect a 4-year-old performance out of a 10-year-old or 10-month-old puppy. So we do talk a lot about that. Even on my website, I talk about a couple different things, and even how we feed our dogs is different. Um, when we had a big kennels full of pointing dogs, if they weren't done eating in 3 minutes, they didn't eat, I knew I had a sick dog. And over the years, we've saved numerous dogs' lives by just observing that feeding pattern. You'll get some people that leave food in front of the dog constantly. Then there's the other group that has group feeding, whatever works for people. We feed dogs individually, and by the time I'm done, they better be done in 2 or 3 minutes. And, having a veterinarian sitting next to me, she can spot sick dogs pretty quickly. And that's something we've learned over the years.
Yeah.
Very handy, I reckon that is, having her there beside you.
Yeah, sometimes it's not so handy.
Absolutely. And I love that little bit of advice you gave. Actually rings through. I actually had a chat with Kevy Howe last night about exactly the same thing. We've got a young dog here that's very different to something I've bred before, extremely smart, showing me traits I haven't seen. And I rang Kev. I was just having a chat to Kev and said, mate, I got something I think's special, and he wants more, but I'm not giving him more. And he's very smart and he remembers a lot, and I don't want to sour him up. Any advice for me? A lot of my dogs are based on his lines, and he goes, just keep doing what you're doing, because you just mentioned something very smart or something very true there. That pup's still a pup at 10 months old.
Yeah.
Don't try and push them through. Like, we can sour them up, or we can put them in situations that they may, especially those smarter ones that got a good memory, mate. They're not going to forget if there's a bad experience somewhere.
And I think we all have to realize our own capabilities or lack of capabilities. We got a dog, Karana Digby, who was a litter mate to Abba. The previous owners wanted to shoot the dog. And Kevin said he'd take it, and he did. Digby wasn't good at backing sheep, so he wouldn't make a trial dog. So we bought him from Kevin and brought him over here. He was a phenomenal dog to work on both cattle and sheep, but he'd never been worked with a horse. So that was our first challenge, was getting him to work horseback. And once he quit hurting me, then we got the program down, and I had to move location and relative to the flock or the herd we were dealing with. But he was a really smart dog, taught me a lot. At first when he'd come up front and block things up, I thought, what the heck are you doing now? Mm-hmm. And I finally realized he was way smarter than we were. But again, he didn't fit his previous owners. Kevin did a great job getting him ready for us, and we shipped him to America, obviously. Produced really well for us. We still have a couple pups out of him that I just think the world out of. And they're easy. The pups we have were very easy to work dogs. And I found Digby to be the same thing. Although I know some of Kevin's dogs in the wrong hands would be hard to work. But, obviously he's done extremely well with them over the years. And I do follow most of his stuff. I see he just won another trial, second place, first place, second, first, But, again, you learn from all those good dog handlers.
Absolutely. And based on that, you sound like you're fairly patient. Do you have a particular age where you want to see milestones for dogs, or if they're not going, you think they might be suitable for rehoming somewhere else?
Yeah, obviously when they're 3 or 4 months old, you'd like to see them show an interest in stock and do what they can. And then the advice I've been given is lay off them for a little bit. Come back a couple weeks or a month later and give them some more work and ease them into it. Obviously, we're doing more cattle work. So I think one of the things that benefits us in the winter time when you're feeding and you've got cattle coming to feed behind a tractor, it's a good time to use a dog to get behind the mob, bring them up to the feed. They're going to come anyway. So it's a win-win. So that, to me, that's the big thing as far as when do you get them going? And then the type of stock, I like a pretty mature dog if we're dealing with some really rough and tumble kind of cattle. And I know you get them in Australia too. I've been on a couple properties where, dogs get killed here and there, and it's just not good to see. So I don't like seeing pups too young being thrown into tough situations.
Yeah.
And you've seen a way, obviously, a lot of Australians have different techniques of starting their pups. Does that differ much back over in the States?
I don't think it does. The good thing, the people we know have all been trained by Australians. So we've had some good clinicians here. The American clinicians have pretty much focused on border collies, where there's a lot of down, down, down. It's almost robotic, and I don't want to be critical of the breed, but that's the clinicians we've seen. Whereas I don't expect that out of my Kelpie. I don't want them to be a robot. I want them to think. And we had one good dog. We had a young fellow start for us years ago. When we sold him, he was just like a border collie in my mind. He was down every 5 seconds if there was a whistle, and he didn't think. He was always looking at the handler and not necessarily always at the stock. And that's the difference I see. It depends upon the clinician. And like I say, we've been fortunate to have some good Australian folks over here that obviously deal with big stock numbers in scenario. We just had a fellow here from Bendigo yesterday, and he's a stock agent, and he was amazed. There's a big sheep owner up north of us here, and just in the handling facilities are almost prehistoric, to put it bluntly, compared to what you're dealing with over there. Yeah. So again, it's kind of a different world, and I think there's a lot to learn both ways.
I think you put that very nicely and very well.
Hopefully I didn't make any mad.
Right now.
Have you got Sorry.
It's always interesting because, like I say, we've got mountain lions here. We've had mountain lion hounds. Certain breeds are great. We had red bones and red ticks. Others have walkers, or blue ticks. It depends upon what you want. Some are cold trackers. Some need a hot track. Again, and then it's like breeding them can be even more difficult because you're looking for different traits than we do in the stock dog world. But like I say, to me, the Kelpie and the Border Collie can enhance a property so much where you can't afford to bring on help anymore. And, like I say, Janice can go out with a couple dogs by herself, do the same job it used to take 5 people to do.
How do the dogs go with the grizzlies?
Well, hopefully they stay away from them. They're fast, but bears can be rough on a dog. We had some dogs a couple of years ago. I've got some pictures somewhere where the Kelpies treed a couple cubs up a tree, and the mama bear was popping her jaws right next to them. And luckily I got there early enough to get the dogs away. But we do have I think we've had 4 or 5 groups of Australians visit this year, and every time we took them to the mountains, we saw bears. So it's one of those things. It's not uncommon, but I'm more afraid of your sharks and snakes than I am of bears.
That said, like over here, obviously in the pet dog space, there's obviously like a bit of snake avoidance training and whatnot. Does anybody practice like any bear avoidance kind of training or anything like that over there?
Not so much bear avoidance, but because we have rattlesnakes here, we do snake avoidance stuff. And then, on the bear world, 99% of the bears are going to run away. The 1% that doesn't, you just want to get the heck out of Dodge because it's not going to be pretty. But we just have, it's more of bear aware, certain signs. If the dogs are ahead of you or something and start barking where they typically don't bark, you know you've got bear issues or something like that. So again, it's just understanding the animal, your dogs, and what they should or shouldn't be doing. Um, but it's not something we worry about a lot.
Similar with the mountain lion.
Mountain lions really, obviously we tree them with hounds. They're very, in all the years, I won't even give you my age, but a lot. Um, without dogs, I've probably seen 3 mountain lions in my lifetime that weren't in front of dogs. So they're very secretive. They hunt at night typically. Um, you will see them occasionally, but it's so rare. If you've got hounds when we hunt them in the winter, because they do kill, that was one of the big problems with sheep here. They don't just kill one, they kill 30 a night, just for the joy of doing it. Or the sheep all bunch up and smother. Same thing with black bears and grizzlies. A lot of it, they're not even biting them. It's just you're smothering, pushing them all together and smothering them. So, but it's you see all this stuff on movies. Don't believe everything you see.
Do you have any livestock guardians?
We don't. My next door neighbor has 2 guardian dogs. I would say all the sheep people that are running numbers of sheep now, we just have 50 or 60 training sheep. They're all hair sheep. We yard them up every night. We've never had an issue, but every other, I would say, Janice is not practicing veterinarian anymore, but she does do quite a bit of work for the sheep people around here. If their dogs get hurt, they'll bring them over because she'll take them at any hour of the day or night. And they all have guardian dogs and a variety of different breeds. We just had a young lady from up in Saskatchewan. I think she runs up to 10 guardian dogs up there. So I would say every sheep operation around here has them.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you're not into the trialing, but have any of your dogs you've bred, or do you see many Kelpies in the trialing arenas over in the States?
I think it's getting to be more and more. There's a gal up in Miles City, Dana Penrod. She's done quite well with some of the dogs she's bought from us. And it's always fun for us when there's 90 dogs in the competition and she wins. That there were 89 that were not Kelpies and one was.
Mhm.
So she's done well, but we're seeing more and more people that are kind of getting into that. And the other thing I think that's getting very big here is kind of ranch dog competitions, which can be either on foot or horseback, and usually with cattle. And that's getting to be bigger and bigger around here, because you don't have to travel the distances you do for a lot of the sheep trials.
Yeah. And the sheep trials I have seen like online, they're more so have always been like time trials, like fastest around the
Yeah.
board. Is that pretty standard for what we'd expect to see over there?
I think that's, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but that's what I see. They're dominated by border collies, I would say. And they are timed events. They have to go through whatever obstacles that are there. So to be very similar to your 3 sheep trials. A lot along the English lines of trialing. It used to be, I don't know, you're probably too young to have seen it, but One Man and His Dog was a very famous TV show from England and Scotland and Ireland. And so I would say that those trials are based a lot like that. Whereas my personal preference is utility trials. When I go to Australia, that's what I love watching, because to me it's function. It's how you would do something on a property. I wish my dogs could be as well trained as some of the ones I've seen in 3 sheep and that, but the yard dog utility trial, I like the utility trial the best in my own opinion. Yard dog I enjoy. as long as they can do paddock work. If they can't do the paddock work, I don't need them just for the yards. But again, we're dealing primarily with cattle and not sheep. So,
Are you guys bringing cattle into yards often, or is it like the movies where you're still roping them and branding them?
Our favorite time of year is springtime when we're branding, and we might go to 10 or 11 brandings in a spring period at different ranches. So it's because we have a pretty severe winter, we're all locked up and bundled up in Carhartt overalls and jackets and hats and gloves and that. So when spring comes, we enjoy going to the neighbors, getting on your horse, roping calves and branding them, and then sitting around afterwards having a great meal and a few drinks just to catch up with the neighborhood. So that's true. But once you're done with that, right now everybody's probably preconditioning calves for sale as we go into the fall sale period. And then, depends upon the outfit. If you're doing AI work or embryo work, you bring stuff in. So you're not handling stock, but say 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah, radio.
So,
So-
but
Are you still using dogs for that, or not at all?
For what?
For the branding season?
No, well, you might use them to bring them into the area you're going to brand them. But then once you're doing that, the calves, there might be a few cows in the pen with the calves, and then your ropers go in and rope and bring them out. But you're not using dogs for that at all, other than the gathering side of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys aren't using like we were like 6-way drafts, or a round pen with 6 different gates off it to draft cattle in different ways. You guys are still bringing cows to the ground.
Calves, yes, but we're branding calves that are only 60 plus days old. They're not big calves. Where you're dealing with something that's
Yearlings.
10 months old or more.
Yeah.
I've never seen a 6-way sort operate. A crow's nest set up here.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Like I say, the guy from Bendigo went up to this big sheep property, and they run 5,000-6,000 sheep, but their facilities are very, I don't know how to put it. Let's put it the way, they could use some help.
Yeah.
So some of the setups I've seen in Australia are just phenomenal. Even the older setups, I think we could learn a lot from them over here.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Montana used to have a lot of sheep, hundreds of thousands. And I only know of 2 shearing sheds in the entire state right now. So everything's portable. Actually, some of the shearers that shear over here, I know they were shearing on the same crew for Rex Hawking at Lucendale. So we just started chatting with him, and he said, "Yeah, we're going to South Australia next." I said, "Where?" He said, "You know the Hawkings?" I said, "Yeah, I happen to know them." So it's a small world, but we get a lot of your guys coming over here to do the shearing, but they're all portable rigs.
Yep. Well, there you go. Did not know that.
Yeah.
No, neither did I. But have you got any children yourself, Bill?
2 boys, and one is a finance guy in New York City, and the other one is a fisheries biologist over in Idaho.
Well, there goes that question. I was going to ask how the livestock passed down.
It's frustrating. You'd like them to come back to the land, but it's a hard life, as you know, and financially not the most secure in the world. But it was good that we both had careers that we were able to do both, put it that way. And I swore I wasn't going to buy any more capital equipment. And so what did I do? Just get another tractor and baler. I could kick myself in the head because, it's so hard to get help to do stuff. You almost have to do it all yourself anymore.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It is. But we love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
What kind of period would you say that this has happened over? Because Well, you see like a lot of American stuff, and like, obviously it's still real labor intensive. Like you said before, 10 cowboys, right? There's always hands on the ground. So is this something that's just happened, say, in the last couple of years, or is this something that's been happening over the last 5 to 10? Like, where have you noticed the change?
I would say, the labor thing, very similar to Australia. America is what, 5% rural and 95% urban. And it's just like Australia. I would guess 90+% of the people live in urban environments near the coast. And then you go inland and you realize there's not many people that can help you. The one thing that I think is a little different, and it depends upon where and how remote you are in Montana or Wyoming, whatever, neighbors still help neighbors a lot instead of hiring contractors to do jobs. So, a branding, if you had to pay the people, it would be questionable whether you'd make any money at the end of the day. But all your neighbors are pretty much going to help because they'll come and help you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that community still, and that Western lifestyle is something. Obviously, we've just had a bunch of Australians that go out with an outfitter here just to ride in the mountains and see what we get to see every day. And a lot of Europeans come over here for the same thing. So there's still, and it was funny, Laura, when we were at the trial, I was asked probably 150 times if we've seen the movie Yellowstone. I've seen part of it. And the valley is 2 valleys to the west of me. So don't believe everything you see. We haven't gone to the train station yet.
Oh, I love it, mate. So, is there any advice that you would give to someone that wanted to pursue a career over in the States in the livestock and agricultural sector?
Well, one of the things I think, just advantage-wise, and I've talked with David when he was here just recently. Rod Cavil was here recently. Because we are kind of horse-oriented here still, although that's changing depending upon the terrain. What I like about Australia is all the pony clubs and things like that, where you learn proper technique in both English and stock saddles and things like that. We've gotten away from that. The other thing, educationally, a lot of your universities and trade schools that are in the agriculture sector are doing a really good job. One of the advantages I think you have there is because you're an island, you have to understand international trade. Whereas in America, a lot of it is between states, if I can say that. It's not to say that some people aren't dealing with international, but I see much more and I hear much more from the Australian stock people about international trade, live animal transport, to the Thailand and Vietnam and all that. And just some of the terminology and the knowledge, I'm pretty impressed by what I hear when I'm there. And we get some of that, but not to the degree that I've experienced, at least over there.
Yeah.
When are you back over here, mate?
Hopefully mid-March next year. And I hope to get up to the Gulf country, get up Cape York. We've never been there. And I want to catch some big fish. And then we'll go down, definitely go see the Dawson River folks, the Lorimers. And I'm sure we'll hit Ningen and a few other spots too. So we tend to travel around quite a bit and try and do something different each trip. Just love Australia and the people. So that's on the planning list right now.
Would you ever move back full time?
Hey, mate, we're in Yellowstone country. No way. One thing I like is terrain, and you must admit, once you get off the coastal ranges, it's pretty flat. When you can flood all the way from the Gulf down to Adelaide with one big rain,
Yeah.
it's a different world. But no, we love going there. But, because I've spent most of my life over here, the connections are here. We live in beautiful country. We have 3 streams that are clear, not muddy, going through the property. There's still green grass out there. It'd be a hard one to separate, but I wouldn't want to not be able to go to Australia every year either, because every year's been an adventure for us.
That's unreal.
Yeah, one of the biggest ones was I was out of Birdsville, and they challenged me to go bronco catching at the rodeo there, which I did on a horse called Winston, a big old Clydesdale, and I thought I was pretty sharp. It was totally different than how we do it, but I caught my first beast in about 30 seconds, drug it up to the panels. And do you think I could catch the second one? No. But what fun, and boy, the rum was flowing.
Mate, obviously you've got a very good what's the word I'm thinking of? I don't know. A reach into Australia, all different handlers. Is there someone you'd like to see us sit down and have a chat with on Dog Talk?
I wish I'd known how many people you've already interviewed, because a lot of the ones that I know you've probably interviewed already. But, it's different because so many people, out at Atisha Gray's property, it's so different than what Kevin's dealing with at Yagara. Then you go out to Ningen and see Gary and David and some of the other folks there. It's a different environment. So what I think, for Dog Talk is you've got the whole gamut there. When I go up to Lorimer's, southwest of Rocky, they're in a whole, they've got farming, and then their cattle work, and they're doing a lot of horseback stuff. So that, it's not a huge property, but they're doing it different than a lot of others. So I think you have the opportunity there. And that's the thing that would be interesting. If this was in America, this kind of format that you've got, I think you'd find a lot of people interested. The thing that's been frustrating for us is that every single person that buys a puppy from us wants to know what book they should get. Well, obviously Tony's big Kelpie book was out of print pretty quick. It is back in print, but we could have sold one of those to everybody that ever bought a puppy. The same thing with DVDs and things like that. What's just hit Netflix here is Muster Dogs. And obviously we've seen that a year and a half ago or something. We saw it before you guys got to see it. But now we're getting calls on Kelpies just because of that TV show on Netflix. Yeah. So I think there's an arena there. And it's the other thing that was always interesting to us going to the national trials is there's no marketing that we've seen other than you might get a sticker from the Kelpie Council occasionally. But, if you were in America, there'd be T-shirts and hats and coffee clubs and blah, 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 all this other stuff. So marketing, you've got a great product in whatever kind of dog you pick for your stock work. It's a tough market you've got because you've got so many urban people that know nothing about your lifestyle. And that's the advantage in America, I think. There's still a pretty good connection to rural, even though most people live in an urban setting, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
But you've got some great people there that can, some people are better on camera and can talk. Other people, it might be a little bit more difficult. You have to get it out of them. I can talk maybe too much, but it's a great venue. I mean, just me. I met Laura at Mansfield. We were chit-chatting about stuff, and I've always felt, even when we were doing a lot of bird dog field trials, one of the things that older people that have been in the game for a long time, share your secrets, because it's so hard for young people. Yeah, they may be out competing you down the road, but who cares? It's more about the dog and passing on that knowledge that may have taken 30 or 40 years to get from somebody.
Yeah.
But if you keep it as a secret, it dies as a secret. So even in the bird dog world, we always talked about getting young people involved. It's expensive, you have to travel and all that. But if you don't pass that on, you're really hurting the sport, I think, and the working world. So that would be the advice I would give to people. But I think you have a whole gamut of personalities there. Some you might not want on there, but others you will. We've seen a little bit of everything. So,
well, thank you for jumping on. It's been great. I know it's pretty late there and you've had a massive day, but there's one last question. Would you rather fight one duck the size of a horse or 20 horses the size of ducks?
say that one more time.
Would you rather fight one duck the size of a horse or 20 horses the size of ducks?
I'm not sure. One horse, probably.
Yep.
You could just call your neighbours over. You go to one big duck.
Yep. No,
We'll
that's
take
true.
him on together. Brand him.
We do have good neighbors, though. That's the fun part. And it is one of the things I noticed in Australia. There's not a neighbor, and it may be because of your work laws or something like that, but I've seen very little neighbor sharing there. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I'd say it's got a ring to it. Like, I'm sure, like, there are like a heap of circumstances where they do come, to your aid, and they're but as a general thing, I suppose it's probably not as fluent as you guys would see over there.
Yeah.
But over here, not to say it doesn't happen at all. Like, I've witnessed it with many places I have gone to, but probably not in the velocity that you've mentioned.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think a lot of ours, because so many people want to ride a horse, that's easy to get people to come. Now, more often than not, a lot of them can screw you up, and your dog's up. So it is a little different, other than brandings, which, like I say, that's the social event of the year. And then shipping time, when we're shipping cattle at the end of October or so, that's a big community event too. But it's all interesting, and I'm glad you guys are doing what you're doing, because this is fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mate,
Have you had Rex and Kay on?
We have recently.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
Well, Kay is a very special woman in my mind, and I can't say enough good about those two. I always enjoy a dance with her when I'm around there.
Yeah, beautiful. Someone has to keep Rexy in line.
Well, that's easier said than done.
Bill, thank you very much for your time tonight with you, the afternoon for us. Laura, good luck down there at the Supreme. Hope you keep enjoying it and having a great experience. I'll catch you in the Henty next week. And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. And please remember, we learn every day, and the day we don't will be a sad one for all of us.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you guys very much, and good luck at the trial.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Take it easy, Daniel.